everyone, this is Marco and welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be taking a very close look at the Hammond collection VELOCIRAPTOR from the Lost World by Mattel. It's an in-depth review. I've been doing these for quite a bit now, where I analyze the figure from a designer and sculptor's point of view, as well as a Jurassic Park fan. I am very familiar with these dinosaur designs, so let's see what Mattel got right and what they got wrong. But before we start, I have a quick message from today's sponsor. Me. Yes, I know, very shameless of me. Not many of you know that I am also a musician, and today one of my brand new tracks is releasing on Spotify and all major platforms. Yes, I write and compose and record and produce my own stuff. So if you're interested, why not give it a listen? You can also follow my Vasa music channel on YouTube. Link is in the description. But yeah, my new track is called Aperture. The artwork was designed by my good friend Daniel. We went to art school together back in the day, so thank you, Daniel. But please let me know what you think of my music in the comment section down below. Thank you, me, for the quick sponsorship message. Now let's get back to the video. I should mention that this video is going to be quite in-depth. It's going to be quite long. I've got a lot to say about this figure. So first things first, let's take a look at the box. Now this box style is quite standard now with the Hammond collection. It is part of the rebrand of the True Effects. So the box style looks a little bit different from the earlier releases from the line, but it still keeps that nice sleek black look. It's got some metal elements here and there. On the top there's a lovely glossy embossed Jurassic World logo, and the majority of the box has a giant window so we can see the figure. On the top right, we have the True Effects label, just to remind us that this is a premium figure, but we'll see about that. On the bottom left, we have the stylized picture of the raptor from the film, but this is literally just a Jurassic Park 3 raptor maquette, but edited and drawn over to make it look like a Lost World raptor. But I'm really confused because there's plenty of the Lost World raptor maquettes to use instead. I'd much rather have a Lost World raptor maquette picture than this stylized version of a Jurassic Park 3 / Lost World raptor right here. On the bottom right, we have the Hammond Collection logo and the name of the dinosaur. On one side, we have the Hammond Collection logo and a continuation of that raptor picture. And on the other side, there would usually be a still from the movie, but this is actually a production still with the animatronic raptor and our main characters. Underneath it, we have a description, and on the bottom, we have a Jurassic World logo, which is a mistake. There should be a Lost World Jurassic Park logo right there, just like what we saw with the Stegosaurus. And the description says, with distinct and dramatic coloring, the Velociraptors on Isla Sorna are leaping into action. Despite these unique attack abilities, Dr. Sarah Harding and Dr. Ian Malcolm and his daughter are able to make a daring escape. On the back of the box, we have the Jurassic World logo again, instead of the Lost World one. We have the same exact description on the back as well. Some very obviously photo-edited pictures of the figure. Here's a news flash for you here, the eyes don't look like that in person. They always photo-edit them to make them look better on the box because they just don't look that good. The True Effects Premium Details for Enhanced Realism label is there too. Again, Mattel are desperately trying to convince us that these are premium figures, and some pictures of more figures from the line. So with that photo-edited image of the raptor and the wrong logo, this product doesn't seem too promising. Hopefully they put a bit more effort with the figure. There's only one way to find out, and that's by opening the box. So let's go ahead and open the box and have a look at the figure itself. Once we cut the tape and slide the tray out, we can see that the tail is separate, so let's click that in, and here we go, here's the figure all in one piece. So, first impressions. How do I put this politely? It's not really that good. First things I can notice are the colors. Yeah, the shade of orange isn't quite right. The patterns look a little messy too. I can instantly tell that this is a reused body sculpt from Delta and Blue. As always, the hips are too wide. But the main thing is, what is going on with that bottom jaw? Oh, it's hideous. But hey, at least they attempted to do a new head sculpt. So before we start, I'd like to remind everyone that Mattel is marketing these as premium figures. If we couldn't tell. So they honestly believe and want us to believe that their figures have the same standards as some other premium toy companies, like Haya, SH Figure Arts, NECA, McFarlane, and Nanmu. So, as a buyer and a customer, it only makes sense for us to treat them as such. So let's take a look at the sculpt first, the proportions, and then we'll move on to individual parts like the head and the limbs and so on. So the best way to find out if this figure is accurate is by finding and comparing it to the source material. So what source material or reference material did Mattel use for this thing? It's very hard to tell. They have a history of just using Google Images, so I guess we'll have to use that too. The best pictures you can use are the maquette ones, specifically the T-posing ones. Pictures of them from the side or profile view are the best to get an idea of how the body shapes look like. If they're posed in any dynamic way, it gets quite difficult. So this is where I would recommend any sculptor or artist to use the Jurassic Park Dinosaur Style Guide, which is a collection of dinosaur reference pictures compiled by some very talented people in the community. But since Mattel don't seem to be aware of the existence of this very helpful and useful tool, we'll just have to find some pictures on Google Images. And as I mentioned earlier, the raptor maquettes used in The Lost World are all dynamically posed. So yeah, it's pretty hard if not quite impossible finding some official side views of the raptors from this film. But us fans know that the raptors from The Lost World and Jurassic Park share the same sculpt. And there are side profile pictures of the maquettes from the first film, like this one. And that's a great place to start. As a designer, using this as reference for the Lost World raptor body shape is probably your best bet. So did Mattel do that? Did they use the Jurassic Park 1 raptor maquettes as reference for the body shape? No. As I mentioned earlier, the body on this figure is the same one used for the blue figure. So that kind of puts a bit of a spanner in the works, doesn't it? Because they would have used the ILM model for blue as reference for blue. And we all know that they're very different raptors. Or are they? Yes, they are different, but they do have something in common. See, in the behind-the-scenes featurettes for Jurassic World, the filmmakers did state that they scanned the original Jurassic Park raptor maquette models as a starting point to create Blue and the rest of the squad. So that means proportions-wise, they should be quite similar, if not the same. And yes, that is indeed the case. But they do have some differences. The head sculpt is different, which by the way, us fans already knew that. But there are other two major differences. One of which is that the Jurassic World raptors don't have a pubic bone. You see that thing right there in the middle of the legs? Yeah. The original raptors from Jurassic Park are a little bit closer anatomically to the real thing. That bone right there helps anchor the tail muscles to the hip. But I've heard that Universal think it's a little unsightly and quite suggestive, if you know what I mean. So they decided to remove it from their more recent raptor designs. So what's the other major difference? Well, it's the skin texture. The Jurassic World raptors, which the body of this figure is based upon, have scaly skin texture and all that sort of stuff. On the other hand, the Jurassic Park raptors in general tend to have a little bit more of a leathery look, with plenty more skin folds and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, the body sculpt on this Lost World raptor figure should have more of a leathery look than scaly. Also, it should have that pubic bone. But since the body proportions from the Jurassic Park maquette and the Jurassic World raptors are pretty much the same, it's not too much of a stretch for Mattel to use this body instead of making a whole new one. But it's a premium line we're talking about. It's totally acceptable for them to do this on the mainline figures, but since this is a premium collector grade figure, Mattel really should have gone ahead and sculpted a new body with the correct texturing and with the pubic bone. And lo and behold, Nanmu have sculpted a brand new body for these. But hey, let's go back and look at the proportions of this figure compared to the reference material. I have this lovely render made by the Red Raptor, which is based on the maquettes. And you can see that the proportions are really close to the ILM Blue model. We'll be comparing the figure's proportions to what Mattel used as reference originally, which is the Blue model used in the film. And here you go. We can instantly notice that the tail is too short, and that the legs are a bit long, which is a pattern with these Hammond collection figures. Especially the thighs, they are quite a bit longer than they should be. It has a little bit of a pot belly, but the way the back arches, it just doesn't match the reference material. I just can't stop looking at that bottom jaw, man. So I went ahead and did some photo editing, and here's the figure originally, and here it is with corrected proportions. Some things are more subtle than others, but the length of the tail really does do a lot, I think. And it generally just doesn't look as good as it could have been. But again, it could be worse. I mean, those first Raptor figures they made were just horrible. So there have been improvements. But at this stage, I believe they should have improved even more, especially considering that they keep doubling down that these are premium grade collector's figures. Anyway, let's start looking at the individual elements of the sculpt, and let's start with the head. Now, I can appreciate that they attempted to do a new head sculpt, instead of fully committing to the tempting, lazy route of reusing the head sculpts as well. You can see they tried to make it look like the Lost World Raptor, kind of. But even then, they didn't do a great job, unfortunately, and it's all ruined by that horrible bottom jaw, with that huge underbite. But we'll be talking more about that in the articulation section of this video. So let's compare it with the reference material. The best look we can get of the head shape and head sculpt in general is by looking at the animatronics. And you can see there's something a little off with the top of the head. They've added some crests on the top, which, to be fair, the original Raptor does kind of have some very, very, very subtle crests. But these crests look a lot more akin to what we see with the Jurassic Park 3 Raptors. And there's something odd going on with the eye area, with the orbit and the eyebrow. So this is what it would look like if it was a bit closer to the reference material. And this should really help put things into perspective. And the back of the bottom jaw is just the complete wrong shape, unfortunately, but that's due to incorporating a cheap jaw hinge, which again we'll talk about later. It looks incredibly derpy from the front. Here it is with corrected shapes here and there. And looking at it from the top, the base of the head is definitely too wide. Again, this is a pattern with Mattel. They really can't get the width of the heads right. And I've come to one really sad conclusion, unfortunately, but I'll let you all know towards the end of the video. Looking at the inside of the mouth, the teeth look a bit more defined than the first releases, which is great. The detail inside the mouth is quite soft, and it doesn't really match the rest of the figure in terms of quality. Now let's talk about those eyes, because this figure in particular has something that is extremely weird. On this side of the head, the eye doesn't look too bad. I mean, it's probably as good as it gets, considering it's a small Hammond collection figure. In this case, again, they painted the pupil on the surface of the eye, which completely defeats the purpose of having glass eyes in the first place. I'm so tired about having to repeat myself every time with these figures. The whole point of having glass eyes, which is the reason they implemented them in the first place, is that there's an optical illusion where the pupil looks like it's following you around. It looks like the eye is looking at you at every angle. And that effect is successful only if you position the pupil behind the surface of the eye. That optical illusion is really cool and all, but they do come with a nasty side effect. The smaller the eye, the darker they get. Because of the nature of glass eyes, where the texture of the eye, the color and the pupil, are located behind the surface of the eye, they create more shadow, which makes the eyes look dark and dead and soulless in most angles. You have to shine a light into the eye to be able to get the effect properly. Since Mattel are painfully aware of how bad the glass eyes look on smaller figures, hence the photoshopping on the box, they decided to put the pupil on the outside on the surface because you couldn't see it at all before. But now you only have the drawbacks of the glass eyes. Sure, you might be able to see the pupil now, but you can't see the color of the eye unless you shine a light directly into it. And because the pupil's on the surface, it doesn't follow you around. But anyway, if we turn the figure around, the eye looks pretty different. Look at this. They actually went ahead and painted the color over the surface of the glass eye, just on this side though, which just so happens to be the side of the figure that faces the outside of the box. Which reminds me a little bit of what Hasbro did with the Jurassic World figures. Remember those? They displayed the nicer side and hid all of the bullet holes or screw holes on the side that you couldn't see, which was covered by the box. I don't know if this is intentional or a weird mistake, But if they're trying to make the eye look more appealing on one side and then you take it out of the box and it's actually not as good, that is really bad. I really hope it's just a mishap on my figure, a quality control issue if you may, because if this is intentional, oh, that is not very good. Let me know in the comment section down below if your figure is the same or if it's any different. In any case, it's not very premium, is it? And that's enough about the head. Let's move down to the neck. Now the neck isn't anything special, it's about as standard as you can get for a Mattel figure, but this is where we start to see that the texturing is starting to change. We go from the more accurate leathery look from the head to the more scaly body, which is incorrect. So from this point onwards, the body is, well, I would like to say retooled, but it isn't. It's just straight up reused from Blue and Delta. Hold on. I need to clarify something. When I was recording the voiceover of this video, I noticed something a little bit weird. Well, technically it is a reused body. The texture's slightly different, but hold on, let me explain from the beginning. The main reason companies reuse sculpts or retool things is to cut down on costs. Because that would include paying the sculptor for extra work, for extra hours, and then making whole new molds for it, and that's very expensive. But while recording this voiceover, I noticed something really weird. Well, yes, this is generally the same body shape and body sculpt used for Blue and Delta. They actually went ahead and modified the sculpt a little bit here and there. Very, very minor changes, like the texture on the spine, on the top of the hips, and on the tail. So not only they wasted time and money on having to make new molds for the body, but they also wasted it on making a whole new mold for the tail too. So why am I saying it's a waste of time and money? Well, because the sculpt isn't actually that different. They didn't fix what needed fixing or adjusting. The Lost World Raptor has more leathery looking skin, but they didn't change that on the whole body, just a little bit up on the spine and on the hips. But the thing that has me most confused is they retextured the tail to make it even more scaly. To make all the extra effort of making new molds worth it, you'd make sure you'd actually fix what needed fixing and fix the texture on most of it instead of some very small areas like this. These little changes they did not warrant making new molds. So yeah, even if the texture is still wrong, I just can't make sense of this at all as a designer. It's just nothing makes sense with Mattel. But the detail itself is quite crisp. On the top of the neck we see scaly detail, and on the bottom part of the neck you can see a bit more skin folds. Mattel likes to go a bit soft with the detail under the neck, but this time it looks nice and crisp. Moving down to the torso, again this is the torso of VELOCIRAPTOR Blue. The skin texture is all wrong, except for the under part where the belly is. That part looks a little bit more leathery with more skin folds and all of that, which is a bit more accurate, but the rest just isn't. As I mentioned earlier, the shape of the torso doesn't really reflect what we see on the reference material. It is a bit pot-bellied, the shape of the back is a bit off, and it's missing that pubic bone or hip bone. Unsurprisingly, Nanmu did it much better, and this is how it's supposed to look like. Most of the texturing is just incorrect, and the only parts that it is correct, it's more of a happy coincidence. Now moving down to the limbs, let's start with the arms. The arms are a little bit weird too. The hands in particular, it's got some decent musculature, but again the texture on the arm is all scaly when it should be a little bit more leathery looking. Now the hands are actually reused from the first ever Hammond collection Raptor. A lot of people didn't like those because the first finger was way too short, and Mattel went ahead and resculpted some new arms for Blue and Delta. Those are different, but they reused the ugliest hands for this one, which was just a very poor choice. In all fairness, the first finger on the Raptors is usually a little bit shorter, but this figure takes it to a whole new level. And looking at the legs, the thighs and the hips are way too wide. And if we compare it to the style guide, yeah, I mean, look at that. This thing is thick. And the thighs, as I mentioned earlier, are way too long too. It's got some nicely defined musculature. Maybe there's a few too many muscle lines in there. And again, the texture is all wrong. The calves are nicely defined, however, they are a little bit too skinny, and I'm not going to repeat myself about the texture again. Now the feet are interesting, they're definitely different from Blues and Deltas. I'm pretty sure these feet are reused from the ARTEZA Raptor. Yeah, so Mattel's reusing parts from other species now, brilliant. The claws are weirdly really long and quite hook-shaped for being toe claws. I feel like all these toe claws are all the same looking, when the retractable claw should be more hook-shaped And yeah, looking at it closer, the first claw and the second claw are pretty much the exact same, when there should be a much more noticeable difference. I almost forgot to mention that the dew claw is sculpted too. Moving down to the tail, as I mentioned earlier, it's a little bit too short. The base of the tail is way too round, it's circular, when it should be more oval shaped. It's to allow for the tail to twist like this, which is just unnatural. Mattel are incredibly adamant about retaining this articulation, when it's something the animal just could not do, and it's just visually wrong too. Like, what I'm saying is, it almost looks like they're intentionally making the figure look less accurate to incorporate this articulation, which shouldn't be there in the first place. Sometimes it's hard when I'm structuring these videos to separate the sculpt from the articulation like this, because a lot of the articulation does affect the look of the figure, like with the jaw, the hips, and the base of the tail. It's got some decent musculature, but I must point out that the very top of the tail has got some incredibly fine scale detailing going on, which again is not accurate to the Lost World Velociraptor, and it creates a very stark contrast between the very softly textured top of the hips to the incredibly defined fine detail on the tail. If a company like Nanmu or higher would sculpt their figures with inconsistent texturing like this, a lot of collectors would not be very impressed. So yeah, that's everything about the sculpt. It is a bit of a mess of a figure, a bit of a Frankenstein monster, if you will. And I've got to be honest with you guys, if I created this figure, I would be embarrassed to sell it as a premium figure, just from a sculpting and sculptor's standpoint alone. And with that said, let's move along and have a look at the paintwork, shall we? As I mentioned earlier, the colors just aren't quite right. The whole figure is pigmented in this orange color, which verges too much on the red side of orange. It's not as bad as the Stygimoloch, that figure was just straight out red. And it's way too saturated too. It does not look organic whatsoever. It does have some counter shading, which is good, but it's the wrong color. This counter shading is too pink, too flesh colored. It should be more white or off-white, leaning closer to the yellow side of white. Also, the counter shading stops way too soon. It should go all the way down the tail as well, which is another of the many instances of Mattel trying to cut corners here and there, and lining their pockets. And then we have the actual patterns themselves, which are tiger stripes, but they're very chaotic and messy looking. Mattel tend to have a tendency of making very chaotic looking patterns, especially on the smaller figures. This does not look like the reference material. Nanmu, for example, try to be sure and make the patterns match with the on-screen counterpart. The placement of every stripe is meticulously thought out. That's how a premium collector's figure should be. You cannot say the same about this figure, my goodness. The patterns on the head specifically are just wrong. For example, on the top of the head that's just straight out missing, the eye orbit should be painted with a dark purple or dark red. And you should have tiger stripes on the snout itself that end in a point. To make this figure even more accurate, it should have some patterns along the lips too, but I can understand them trying to cut a little bit of the costs here. The tiger stripes themselves on the body should be a lot more spaced out, less close together, a bit thicker and more defined. Yeah, it just looks like the designers at Mattel took a very quick look at the reference material and just filled in the blanks from memory, which is a bad and lazy practice for toy designers, especially for premium ones. The same thing goes for the patterns on the neck, on the limbs, on the tail, but I must say that the patterns on the shin at least are a little bit closer to what we see on the reference material. The paint on the tail should end with a dark tip, which this doesn't. I think this figure would have benefited with a little bit of a subtle spray on the feet and on the tip of the tail, with a darker color. And they should have done what they did with the Stygimoloch and added a bit of the counter shading on the back of the thighs and on the calves. The inside of the mouth is painted, both on the roof and on the tongue, and the teeth are painted with an off-white color. All the claws are painted, with the exception, of course, you guessed it, of the dew claw. And finally, paint-wise, there's that funny thing happening with the right eye. So that's all about the paint. Let's move along and talk about the articulation. It's got the standard Hammond Collection Small Carnivore articulation points, but they're actually worse here and there. The jaw hinge this time severely affects the look of the figure. Because they're using the cheaper jaw hinge that they've been applying to the figures recently, well, I say recently, they've been using this cheaper jaw hinge on the premium small Hammond Collection figures all the time. They've always affected the look of the figure, but this time it just gives it a massive underbite. They used to do custom jaw hinges for the mainline Raptors, and it's mad to me that they decided to use a cheaper jaw hinge on the premium figures. Not only does the custom jaw hinge have better articulation, in terms of quality especially, it's much sturdier, but it makes the figure look a lot more accurate too, and much more pleasing to the eye. I am so incredibly tired of these jaw hinges. Mattel, please fix this crap. And if we move to the neck articulation, this time it's even more limited than usual. What's crazy to me is that they improved the articulation with Delta's neck, which is the sculpt that they're using this time as well, but it's got much worse range of motion. This thing just cannot look down. We were all really happy with the improvements with the range of motion with Delta, and yet this newer, later release figure takes a few steps back. Taking a look at the arm articulation, the shoulder hinge on mine is particularly stepped, which is a little ugly compared to my Delta figure. It's something that I would love Mattel to try and do on the smaller figures as well. On the T-Rex and on the Stegosaurus, they managed to hide the shoulder hinge really nicely. They are yet to incorporate that on other carnivores, so I hope they do that on larger ones, but also if they can on the smaller ones. I understand it's going to be very tricky though because of the scale. And by the way, the articulation on the right arm of my figure is particularly loose. With permission from Blue Fury Design, she sent me this video of the articulation inside the hips, and just look at how much these joints stick out from the body. Like, no wonder the hips are so wide. They incorporated this kind of hinge to allow this kind of motion right here, where the legs swivel in and out, but I'm pretty sure there's other methods of incorporating a hinge that doesn't severely affect the look of the dinosaur like that, with such wide hips. I mean, look at Nanmu. Look at the beasts of the Mesozoic line as well. They can do it fine. Maybe Mattel are kind of forced to have these ones which are a bit more rigid or resilient maybe? Because of age safety rating reasons perhaps? But if that's the case, then why did they switch from a much sturdier jaw hinge to a much more flimsy one that if you pull hard enough it can just come off? To me it just doesn't make sense. Personally, I think that the hip articulation is just not needed. As long as the legs can go backwards and forwards and it looks accurate, that's all it really needs to do. But that's just my opinion. But anyway, looking at the articulation as a whole, the jaw articulates like this. The neck articulates like this. The arms like this. The legs like this. The hips like this. The tail like this. And it's got a bendy wire in it too. And that concludes the articulation segment of this video. I went ahead and did some photo editing and applied all of the changes that I would add to this figure. This is the original figure right here, and this is my photo edited version. And the difference is night and day. It no longer has an underbite, the head shape is correct, the whole body structure is more akin to the maquettes, and the difference with the colors is just night and day, isn't it? The base color is more accurate, the counter shading is a bit more white, and the patterns reflect what we see on screen. This is what we could have had, guys. And I've come to one conclusion. And as a sculptor myself, it's pretty upsetting for me to say this, but I honestly think that Mattel really need to change their sculptor for the premium line. They need someone that has a good eye at replicating designs, that is a bit more familiar with the dinosaur designs in general from Jurassic Park. Having an excellent sculptor that has a good eye at this stuff is one of the most vital aspects about premium figures. And I can instantly tell the specific style that this sculptor has. It's a lot more cartoony than the way it should be. It should look really realistic, which works fine for the mainline figures, but not on a premium collector's figure. Collector grade figures need to properly replicate the source material. There's plenty of even amateur sculptors out there that can do a much better job, and these people at Mattel are professionals. As a sculptor myself, I can see that the things that they get wrong are very basic things that shouldn't be a problem in the first place. I can understand if the sculpt of one or two figures isn't exactly the same. Everyone makes mistakes. But considering we see the same exact repeated mistakes on pretty much all the figures, that to me is a sign that things need to change. It's not normal in a premium collector's line that the majority of the figures have something pretty wrong with them in terms of accuracy. I mean, they shouldn't be a fluke here and there about things being correct. They should all be right, and maybe have a couple of outliers at worst that aren't correct. Interestingly, Mattel have given us a bit of an insight on how they design their premium figures through the behind the gates videos, and that's really fascinating because this is what they do. Basically, they have a designer replicate the source material with a sketch or a drawing, and then the sculptor bases the sculpt onto that drawing or final design. But here's the problem. If the sculptor bases their sculpt on someone else's interpretation of the source material, something's just bound to get lost in translation. This practice isn't ideal. I've dedicated years of my student life to studying all this stuff, and I have a degree in model design, and I can tell you this isn't how a sculptor should work. They can still use the sketch to envision where the articulation points go, but the sculptor shouldn't trace that sketch and base the proportions of the sculpt onto someone else's interpretation and then add all the detailing looking at pictures. They should trace the original material and pay close attention to everything. Not just the details, but the proportions too. Or better yet, do what Hasbro does for the Star Wars line. Use the actual models used in the film. That would be awesome. So yeah, that was talking about the Hammond collection designing process as a whole. Going back to the Raptor though, someone might think that the lack of attention to detail on these figures might be due to lack of reference material, but come on, if Nanmu can do it, surely Mattel can do it. Mattel have the license, which doesn't just mean that they can use the Jurassic logo officially, but it means that they have access to all of the material that Universal can give them, including reference material. So they've got all the official reference material they could ever want. This is just proof to me that they just do not put enough effort into their stuff. And marketing these as premium figures does not solve the issue. They actually need to up their game and do premium figures the way they're supposed to be. And slapping gimmicks on them is not the way to go. Crappy glass eyes and a little extra paintwork compared to the main line, that last point can be debatable at times, is not what makes them premium. Actual attention to detail and accuracy does. In my eyes, either Mattel gets better, or Universal should just hand the license over to another company that can actually do premium figures. They can still both do them at the same time, but Mattel will actually have real competition. And as Hoskins says, struggle breeds greatness. So yeah, that's my standpoint for now for the Hammond collection line in general, and this Raptor figure just does not cut it. It's just not a premium figure whatsoever. No matter what Mattel's trying to tell us, it's just quite lazily designed. They put very little effort and attention to detail in the paint, and they just reuse sculpts from other figures. And the only new sculpt on it just doesn't look good enough. And that bottom jaw again is just horrific. If you like it, that's fine, but it's just personally not for me. You're entitled to like whatever you want. Your subjective feelings and point of views are valid, but objectively speaking, this figure is not a good premium figure. The next video is going to be a bit of a transition from my review videos that I've been posting lately to more of a making one. And from then on, I've got some more videos coming out where I'll be making more stuff too. It's going to be a plastic surgery video where I'm going to be showing you how to replace the head with a brand new, more accurately sculpted one, as well as improving the paint job a little too. So stay tuned and I'll catch you next time. Stay safe and thank you very much for watching.